Mahor had always been the kind of woman every man dreamed of, marrying, elegant, soft-spoken, and deeply loyal. She had grown up in a modest home, raised with values of compassion, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. When she married Rami 5 years ago, she believed she had stepped into a fairy tale. He was charming, intelligent, and ambitious, a self-made businessman whose name had become synonymous with success in Lahore's elite circles. Their wedding had been the talk of the town, a union that looked as perfect as it felt in the beginning. Their home in Goldberg was a masterpiece: glass chandeliers, Italian flooring, a lush green lawn with white roses she personally tended to. Friends who visited would always say the same thing: Mahar, you're so lucky. You have everything: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a perfect life. Mahar would smile, not correcting them, because once, it was perfect, or at least, she thought so. In those early days, Ramez would surprise her with flowers after meetings, kiss her forehead every morning, and thank her for the little things: his breakfast, his organized wardrobe, her soothing voice after a rough day. Mahar thrived in that warmth. She left her job as a schoolteacher willingly, dedicating herself entirely to their home and to him. She learned his preferences, his routines, even the way he liked his tea. It made her happy to care for him. She believed that love was shown in acts of service, and she gave without limits. But somewhere along the line, things began to shift. It started subtly. Ramez began coming home later. He no longer looked her in the eyes when she spoke. Dinners turned silent, his smile vanished, and his phone became a constant companion. Mahar convinced herself it was just stress. Business was booming. He had launched a new line of textile exports and was always jet-setting between Karachi and Dubai. She prepared his favorite meals, wore his favorite colors, even tried initiating long-forgotten date nights. Yet, the distance only grew. Gone were the forehead kisses, gone were the heartfelt thank yous. Now there were cold nods, distracted hums, and vague excuses. I'm tired. I have a call. Don't wait up. Even the bedroom, once a sanctuary of closeness, turned into a cold, hollow place, where Ramez slept with his back to her. Mahar tried harder, believing that maybe she wasn't doing enough. Maybe she had become boring. Maybe he needed more support. Maybe. But the truth gnawed at her quietly. One evening, as she sat alone at their 12-seater dining table, the truth crystallized not in words, but in silence. The kind of silence that feels like a scream. Ramez hadn't even called to say he wouldn't be home. The doll she had lovingly prepared sat untouched. Her reflection in the tall glass window looked like a ghost of the woman she used to be. She was beautifully dressed, her hair done, lips painted, but there was no light in her eyes. She realized then she had become a stranger. In her own home, the house she'd once adored felt unfamiliar. The man she had built her life around now felt like a distant memory. Her sacrifices, her devotion, her efforts, they were invisible. And yet she smiled through it all, maintaining the image of a perfect wife. Because that's what she was taught. A good wife endures. A good wife holds on. But something inside Mahar had begun to stir, a quiet knowing, a silent strength. And though she didn't know it yet, that awakening would change everything. It was a rainy Thursday evening, the kind of evening when the streets glistened with headlights and the sky hung low with heavy clouds. Inside the sprawling marble villa, Mahar lit a few candles to soften the mood. She had just served dinner: karahi chicken, garlic naan, and mint ray tiramis's favorites. She hoped tonight would be different. Maybe they'd talk. Maybe he'd look at her like he used to. But when Ramez walked in, soaked slightly from the rain, he didn't even glance at the dining table. He loosened his tie, ran a hand through his wet hair, and said flatly, "Mahar, we need to talk." Those 4 words had a weight she couldn't explain. He didn't sit. He remained standing, pacing slowly near the window. Mahar stood still, her heart beginning to thud louder than the rain outside. Something in his tone, in his body language, felt final. "I've thought about this for a long time," he began. His voice was eerily calm, rehearsed even. "There's no easy way to say it, so I'll just be honest." Mahar held her breath. "I want a divorce." The words landed like ice water poured down her spine. Her throat dried instantly. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set the jug of water back on the table. "What?" she whispered. He turned to face her then, his expression unreadable. Not angry, not regretful, just detached. "I'm in love with someone else. Her name is Zoya. We were together in university. We reconnected a few months ago, and there's more. She's dying, cancer, terminal." Each word cut deeper than the last. Mahar's breath hitched. Her vision blurred slightly, but she didn't let the tears fall. She steadied herself against the back of a chair. Ramez continued, as though trying to justify a business decision. "She has a few months left. maybe less. She never married. She has no one. I can't let her die alone, Meha. I love her. I need to be with her. Silence filled the space between them like a chasm. Meha felt 1,000 things at once: shock, betrayal, heartbreak, confusion. But what she felt most was calm, an eerie, unfamiliar calm. She stood tall, eyes focused on him. The pain was there, yes, but so was clarity. So was acceptance. And then, softly, so softly that it made Ramiz falter, she said, "Okay." His brow furrowed. "What?" I said, "Okay," she repeated, her voice steady, almost serene. "If that's what you want, I won't stop you." He stared at her, clearly unprepared for this reaction. He had expected pleading, outrage, a dramatic meltdown. Instead, he saw a woman who looked heartbreak in the face and refused to collapse. "I'll have the papers drafted tomorrow," Mehor added, moving toward the shelf and retrieving a small notebook. She jotted something down, her hands no longer shaking. "Just send me what you want, divided, I'll sign." Ramiz's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked confused, maybe even disappointed. He had rehearsed this speech so many times, built up the drama in his head, the nobleman leaving his wife to honor a dying woman's last wish. But Mehar's quiet strength disrupted that narrative. "Mehar," he said, finally, "I didn't expect you to agree so easily." She smiled faintly. "You didn't expect a lot of things." With that, she turned, walking past the untouched dinner table, past the dying candles, and into the hallway. Her back was straight, her head held high. Behind her, Ramiz stood motionless, stunned. He had expected devastation. What he got instead was dignity. And in that moment, though he wouldn't admit it, not even to himself, he felt something strange stir in his chest. Doubt. Long before Ramiz uttered the word divorce, Meher had felt it in her bones. It started with the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. Then came the midnight texting, the mysterious weekend business trips, and the distant look in his eyes when she spoke. Meher wasn't naive. She noticed it all, but she said nothing, not out of weakness, but because she needed time. Time to gather not just her strength, but the truth. One evening while folding his laundry, Ramiz's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He had grown careless lately, no longer bothering to keep it locked. Mahor glanced at the screen. The name read Zoya, followed by a red heart emoji. Her hands paused, her chest tightened. Still, she didn't open the message right away. Instead, she waited for him to fall asleep. Then, in the dead quiet of the night, with only the ceiling fan spinning above them, Mehar sat at the edge of the bed and began reading. What she found was soul-crushing. Dozens of romantic messages, selfies of Zoya in expensive cafes, hotel lobbies, candlelit dinners. She spoke to Ramis with entitlement, as if she already belonged to him. "I miss your arms around me. You shouldn't be wasting time with her. What if I don't have long, Ramis? Promise me you'll make it right before I go." The word that caught Meher's attention was, "before I go." Something about it didn't sit right. Why would a terminally ill woman look vibrant, healthy, glowing in every photo? Why did her Instagram? Yes, Mahar found that to show daily. Gym check-ins, yoga sessions, and spa visits. That night Mehor didn't cry. She printed every message, screenshot every photo, and quietly built a folder labeled "just in case." And then, she made a decision. She would not be the weeping wife who begs to be loved. Instead of confrontation, Mehor hired a discreet private investigator. His name was Mr. Ikram, an old friend of her father's, now retired but occasionally helping people he trusted. Within 2 weeks, he returned with a report that shattered all illusions. Zoya Ahmed was not dying, not of cancer, not of anything. She had never been hospitalized, never received any treatment, and her last medical visit had been for a Botox injection. The terminal illness was a story crafted expertly to manipulate Ramiz's sense of guilt and nostalgia. It was a trap, and he had walked right into it. Meher sat in her room for hours after reading the report, not with rage, but with resolve. That day, something inside her shifted permanently. The woman who had once believed in saving her marriage at all costs no longer existed. She met with her lawyer the next morning, a kind, intelligent woman named Fariha, who specialized in high-asset divorces. Mahar began transferring her jewelry, her share of their joint investments, and the property deed of her father's gifted house into a separate legal trust under her name. She also changed the beneficiaries on Ramiz's business insurance policies, quietly removing herself and replacing them with an anonymous holding company she had set up, just in case things turned messy. Rameus remained oblivious. He came and went as he pleased, still sending texts to Zoya, still sneaking out for late-night meetings, Maher never asked, never accused, never even raised her voice. That was her power, her silence. While Ramiz plotted his escape, she was already building hers. She even visited Zoya once. It was unannounced. A Tuesday afternoon, Zoya lived in a luxury apartment in Goldberg, paid for by Ramiz, though it was under a fake corporate name. Maher walked in as if she belonged there. Zoya was stunned. She wore silk pajamas, not a hospital gown. Her skin glowed. Her laughter died the moment she saw Maher at her door. "I just came to see the dying woman," Maher said calmly, her gaze piercing. "You look miraculously well." Zoya's smirk faded. But Maher didn't wait for a reply. She left just as quietly as she came. Back in her car, Maher didn't cry. She didn't break, in fact. She rolled down the window, let the wind touch her face, and smiled. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. Not a wife, not a victim. A woman reclaiming her power. When Ramiz finally asked for a divorce, thinking he was taking control, he didn't realize Maher had already let go long ago. He thought he was making the first move, but it was checkmate, and he didn't even know it. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and humming with quiet tension. Outside, the sun shone brightly over Lahore's skyline, but inside the grey, concrete building, it felt like winter. Ramiz stood near the entrance, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he wasn't really listening. He was waiting for her. And then, she walked in. Meher. Radiant, poised, stunning in a pastel blue sorry that shimmered softly with every step. Her long hair fell over one shoulder in effortless waves. Minimal makeup, but her eyes sharp, clear, and filled with something Ramiz couldn't quite place. Not sadness. Not regret. Power. Every head turned to look at her. Even the clerk at the desk stopped typing. Ramiz's breath caught for a moment. He had braced himself for a broken woman, puffy eyes, trembling lips, mascara-streaked cheeks. But Maher, she looked free. She walked past him without flinching, without even glancing his way, and took her seat beside her lawyer. Her presence filled the room like music, subtle, commanding, undeniable. She opened her file calmly, signed a few documents, then folded her hands on the table as if attending a business meeting. Ramiz watched her, stunned. His throat tightened. A strange discomfort twisted in his chest. When the judge called both parties forward to sign the final papers, Maher stood gracefully. She walked to the bench, took the pen, and without a pause, signed her name. And then she smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't cold. It was peaceful, like a quiet sunrise after a long storm. Her smile held something ancient and dignified, like a queen setting down her crown. Not because she lost, but because she no longer needed it. That smile unnerved Ramiz more than any tear ever could. He stared at her, as if seeing her for the very first time. This wasn't the woman he had once controlled, belittled, or ignored. This was someone else, entirely reborn, awakened. There was no trace of desperation, no pleading in her eyes, only clarity. The judge stamped the file. "It's done." Maher turned, thanked the judge politely, and began to leave. Ramiz took a hesitant step forward. Maher, she paused, turned slightly, and met his gaze for the first time in weeks. "Yes?" she asked, her tone kind but distant. I didn't expect," he began, but the words vanished, because what could he say? "I didn't expect you to rise from the ashes I left you in. I didn't expect you to look happy without me." She simply nodded, a faint smile still touching her lips. "Take care, Ramiz," she said, "and good luck." With that she walked away. He stood there long after she left, holding the signed documents in his hand. But it wasn't the paper that weighed heavy, it was her smile. The image of her glowing, untouched by bitterness, etched itself into his memory like a scar. He had expected tears. He got liberation. And that haunted him more than any scream ever could. She hadn't just signed her freedom that day, she had rewritten the story of who she was. And Ramiz, for the first time in his life, realized he wasn't the hero. He was just the lesson. Maher moved out of the grand villa with nothing but 4 suitcases and her dignity. She didn't want the chandeliered ceilings or the Italian leather sofas. She didn't want the reminders she had spent years building a palace that never felt like home. Now, she wanted a space where she could hear herself think, feel, and breathe. Her new apartment was a modest 2-bedroom flat in a quiet corner of Goldberg. It didn't have a sprawling lawn or 10-foot mirrors, but it had something far more precious. She chose the furniture herself. Light wood, pastel cushions, a reading nook by the window. Her books lined the shelves again. Fresh lilies sat on the dining table. For the first time in years, every corner reflected her. Mornings became sacred. She woke up with the sun, brewed her own coffee, and read poetry while the city stirred outside. There was no rummies, no constant pressure to look perfect. No one to dismiss her silence as boring. Just her, slowly becoming whole again. One quiet afternoon, while unpacking an old trunk of diaries and letters, she found something she hadn't seen in years, a rough draft of a story she had started before her marriage. Her fingers trembled as she read the first line. She was a storm in a bottle tightly sealed, but waiting to be uncorked. Something inside Moha sparked. She opened her laptop and began typing. That week, she walked into Hero Publishers, one of Lahore's well-known literary houses. She introduced herself confidently, manuscript sample in hand. The editor, a warm, curious woman named Emanu, was instantly drawn to Miha's narrative. A memoir, she asked, but not about pain, about rebirth. Yes, Mehor replied, about becoming. Soon she began working part-time at the publishing house, editing anthologies and coaching young writers. Her days filled with creativity, her nights with healing. She rediscovered her voice, not just on paper but in life. She reconnected with her old friend Zariba, her university roommate now running a design studio. Sana, a mother of two who'd once been her partner in debate competitions. Over chai and laughter, they pieced back the fragments of time lost to marriage, control, and silence. One of them asked gently, "Do you miss him?" Meha sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I miss who I thought he was, but not who he became." At her therapist's office, Meha finally said the things she had swallowed for years. "I thought love meant endurance," she confessed, "but if I gave enough, he'd stay." Her therapist smiled kindly. "And now," Meha said, "I know love shouldn't require erasing yourself." She traveled to Murray in the spring, Hunza in the fall. She took long walks in the hills, stood in silence under vast skies, journaled by firelight. These places didn't ask for explanations, they simply let her be. With every passing week, her inner world bloomed. She started painting again. She joined a yoga class. She bought herself a silver anklet and wore it just because she liked the jingle. She danced alone in her living room to old ghazals and sometimes laughed until her stomach hurt. There was no revenge plot, no public scandal, just transformation. Her healing wasn't loud. It was soft and steady, like waves returning to shore. Months later, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, not to see if Ramiz would find her attractive, but to admire the woman staring back. The fine lines around her eyes held stories. Her posture no longer bent with hesitation. She was no longer waiting to be chosen. She had chosen herself, and in that choice, he discovered something remarkable. Peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from pleasing others, but the fierce, quiet peace of knowing who you are. Even when no one's looking, she was no longer Mrs. Ramiz Aftab. She was Meha, a woman reborn from the ashes, not to destroy but to rise. The wedding was a quiet affair, held in the garden of the same villa where Meha once planted white lilies. Ramiz stood beside Zoya under a floral arch, a man trying to convince himself he had made the right choice. Zoya wore a shimmering ivory gown, her face glowing not with vulnerability or illness, but triumph. Her eyes darted confidently among the small circle of guests, her fingers wrapped tightly around Ramiz's arm. He told himself this was noble, that marrying Zoya was an act of redemption, a second chance at true love, that even if the world judged him, he had done the right thing for a dying woman's final wish. In the first few weeks, everything was idyllic. Zoya was playful, affectionate, full of life. She clung to him constantly, kissed him in the middle of the kitchen, called him her miracle. She spoke of bucket lists and the little time we have left. Ramiz took her on trips Hunza, Dubai, Istanbul, believing he was giving her the world before it slipped away. But the cracks came quickly. It started with her temper, small things like Ramiz being on a call too long or forgetting to buy her favorite scented candles would trigger sudden outbursts. She accused him of neglect, guilt-tripping him with lines like, "I'm dying, Ramiz, and you can't even remember the little things." Then came the control. She went through his phone. She questioned every meeting, every message. She insisted on knowing passwords. "I don't want to waste a moment," she'd say sweetly, but her eyes carried suspicion, not sentiment. Chalked it up to fear. Maybe she was scared of losing time, scared of dying. He kept telling himself that love meant patience, that Meher would have never understood what Zoya needed. But as weeks turned into months, Ramiz began to notice something. Off. Zoya didn't look like someone fighting a terminal illness. Her skin was radiant, her appetite grew. She spent hours at the gym with a personal trainer and posted post-workout selfies with captions like, "Killing it, as always." She hosted brunches, laughed loudly, drank red wine, and never mentioned doctors or treatments. There were no hospital appointments, no medication reminders, No moments of physical weakness, only dramatic tears when she didn't get her way. One evening, Ramiz scrolled through Instagram while she slept beside him. He saw a tagged video: Zoya dancing at a rooftop party with friends, spinning under fairy lights, a champagne glass in hand. She wore stilettos and a sequined mini dress. The caption read, "Life is short, live it glam." The post was from the same week she had claimed to be in intense pain and had cancelled a dinner with him to rest. Something wasn't adding up. That night, he couldn't sleep. Doubt gnawed at him. He sat in his study until dawn, his mind spiraling. What if she had lied? The next day, while Zoya was out shopping, Ramiz opened the locked drawer where she kept a slim black folder, her so-called medical reports. He hesitated only for a second before flipping it open. What he found was stunning. The documents were vague photocopies, some with missing stamps, others with outdated hospital logos. The blood test papers were generic. There were no names of oncologists, no prescriptions, no scheduled treatments. One letter, supposedly from a specialist, had the doctor's name spelled wrong. Heart pounding, Ramiz called a friend, a senior physician at a private hospital, and quietly asked him to run a verification check. Discreetly, he added. 2 days later, he got the answer. Ramiz's friend said gently over the phone, "None of these records are valid. These aren't even proper cancer diagnostics. I'm sorry, but this looks staged." His world tilted. Everything he had given up, his marriage, his respect, his peace, was for a lie. Ramiz sat motionless for hours after that call. He stared at the photo on the wall of their wedding, Zoya beaming like a queen in the background. He noticed something for the first time: his own face, slightly tense, eyes uncertain. He had sensed it all along, but ignored it. When Zoya came home later that evening, carrying shopping bags and humming a tune, she noticed something different in his expression. "You okay?" she asked. Ramiz looked at her, the weight of betrayal sinking in. His voice was quiet but sharp. "Tell me, Zoya, when were you planning to die?" For the first time, her smile faltered. She tried to laugh it off, but Ramiz didn't flinch. He wasn't the lovesick fool anymore. He saw her now clearly, a manipulator, a liar. The silence between them stretched into a chasm, and in that moment, Ramiz finally understood what Mahar must have felt. The sickening twist of being deceived by someone you once gave everything to. Only difference was Mahar had walked away with grace. He, on the other hand, had stayed. The confrontation wasn't explosive. It was chillingly quiet. Ramiz waited until Zoya had poured herself a glass of wine and settled on the velvet couch, scrolling through her phone. The golden bangles on her wrist jingled softly, a sound that once charmed him, now felt like the mocking laugh of fate. He stood across the room, watching her, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, voice calm but laced with steel. Zoya looked up lazily. "Talk about what? I hope it's not another lecture on expenses." He took a breath. "I know you're not dying." There was a moment, just a flicker, where her eyes widened, but then, just as quickly, she smiled. A slow, cruel smile. "Took you long enough," she said, leaning back with a theatrical sigh. "Honestly, I expected you to figure it out much earlier. You're not as sharp as I remembered." Ramiz's stomach turned, so it was all a lie. Zoya tilted her head, swirling her wine. "Not all. I really did love being adored and spoiled. And having you crawl back after all these years, that was satisfying." "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why go through all this? Why pretend?" She stood, walked up to him, and whispered, "Because I never forgot how you humiliated me in college. How you paraded your perfect little Mahar around while I, your first love, was tossed aside. You made me feel small." "That wasn't my fault," he said sharply. "No," Zoya admitted. "But she got the life I wanted. The life you promised me once. So when I saw you again and realized how easily I could manipulate you, I took my chance." She stepped back, sipping her wine like it was a victory toast. "And you gave up your wife for me. How poetic." Her words hit harder than slaps. Ramiz's throat went dry. He had walked away from loyalty, grace, and love for this. A woman who saw his guilt as a game, who wore deception like a designer dress. He thought of Meher, her quiet strength, her unwavering dignity, the way she had signed those papers, with a peaceful smile, like she already knew how it would end. She did know. She saw through Zoya long before he ever could. The illusion shattered. He didn't just feel foolish, he felt hollow that week. His world began to unravel. Zoya, sensing her charade was exposed, no longer pretended to care. She maxed out his cards, threw parties, invited photographers for casual glamour shoots in their home. The press picked it up. Textile tycoon's new bride sparks scandal, read one headline. Investors began to pull out. Longtime clients distanced themselves. One morning, he woke up to an email from his company's board. "We request you step back from day-to-day operations until internal investigations are complete." His reputation, once spotless, was now a joke in business circles. Whispers followed him at every event. Old friends stopped returning his calls. Even his family, once blinded by Zoya's charm, turned cold. His mother refused to speak to him. His younger sister blocked his number after he dismissed her warnings months ago. Alone in his study, Rami stared at the life he'd built, now crumbling brick by brick. The villa felt emptier than ever. Zoya barely came home anymore, and when she did, it was only to argue or mock. He sat at his desk, the silence suffocating. In front of him lay a photo of Mahar taken years ago at a company function. She was laughing, carefree, looking up at him. That woman had loved him deeply, and he had thrown her away for dust wrapped in glitter. He whispered to the empty room, voice trembling, "I didn't lose her to another man. I lost her to the woman she was meant to become." And now, all he had left was regret. The ballroom at Pearl Continental was glittering with chandeliers, satin drapes, and the murmurs of Lahore's elite. It was a high-profile charity gala supporting women's literacy initiatives. Ramirez had been invited as a sponsor, a chance, perhaps, to repair his damaged reputation. He wore his best suit, practiced polite smiles, and tried to ignore the whispers that still followed him. As the evening unfolded, the host took to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's keynote speaker is a woman whose journey from heartbreak to hope has inspired thousands. Please welcome Mahar Vaft." The name hit Ramirez like a jolt. He turned instinctively toward the stage, and froze. There she was, standing beneath the spotlight, wrapped in a maroon silk sari, elegant and poised. Her hair was swept into a classic bun, a single diamond earring glinting beneath the lights. She held herself with a grace that silenced the room before she even spoke. "Good evening," Mahar began, her voice clear and warm. "I used to believe that silence was strength, that suffering quietly made you noble. But I've learned something far more powerful. Your voice, your truth, your story, they are not weaknesses. They are wings." Applause rippled across the hall. Ramirez couldn't breathe. He had never seen her like this, not even during their marriage. She looked unstoppable, admired, alive, and completely untouchable. After the speech, Mahar was quickly surrounded socialites, journalists, philanthropists. But Ramirez pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding, his throat dry. "Mahar," he said, finally reaching her. She turned slowly, eyes calm, expression unreadable. "Ramirez, I didn't know you'd be here," he stammered. "You were incredible." "Truly," she nodded politely. "Thank you." There was a long silence between them. Around them, music played softly and glasses clinked, but for a moment, it all faded. "I was fooled," he said, eyes pleading. "Zoya," she lied, "about everything. I made a mistake. A terrible one." Mahar tilted her head slightly. "Yes, you did. I left you," he continued, voice cracking, "for something that wasn't even real. I see that now. I see you now, the woman I should have stood beside." She looked at him, and for a flicker of a second Ramirez thought he saw a trace of sadness in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I loved you once, Ramirez," she said softly. "With everything I had, I would have walked through fire for you." "I know," he whispered. "That's what I lost." "No," Mahar replied, her voice firmer now. "You didn't lose me to another man. You lost me to the woman I was meant to become." Those words hung heavy in the air. "I don't hate you," she added. "I don't wish you harm, but I don't need to look back either." He stared at her, silent, stunned. Meher offered him a final smile, not bitter, not vengeful, just peaceful. Then she turned, her heels clicking gently as she walked away, her head high. Ramirez remained frozen, surrounded by glittering lights and shallow conversations, but feeling more alone than ever. He had come to rebuild his image, but instead he had been confronted with his greatest loss, the woman who had outgrown the pain he gave her. As she disappeared into the crowd, Mahar's words echoed in his mind. "You lost me to the woman I was meant to become." And there was no coming back from that. The book cover was simple, elegant, white with gold lettering. The title read, "Signed with a Smile by Mahar Aftab." Inside, the pages told a story of love, betrayal, silence, and strength. It was not just a memoir, it was a mirror for thousands of women who had once forgotten their worth in the name of loyalty. The launch event was packed. Women of all ages filled the bookstore, some teary-eyed, some cheering. Influencers, authors, social activists all gathered to celebrate the woman who had become a quiet symbol of transformation. The book soared to the top of bestseller lists within days. Reviews called it a masterpiece of courage, an anthem for the voiceless, a handbook for rediscovery. But Meher didn't write it for fame. She wrote it for them, for the women who stayed too long, for those who signed in pain, and for those still trapped in homes that looked beautiful from the outside, but broke them from within. And Meher didn't stop at the book. With the royalties, her personal savings, and the help of her publisher, she opened a modest building in the heart of the city. Its walls were painted warm earth tones, the doors wide, and a small plaque at the front read, "The Meher Foundation, a place to begin again for divorced, abandoned and rebuilding women." Inside, there were support groups, legal aid, vocational training, free therapy sessions, and a quiet library filled with stories of survival. It wasn't a shelter, it was a launchpad. The morning of the inauguration, Meher stood outside the glass doors, sunlight falling gently across her face. She wore a simple ivory kurta, her hair tied back, a notebook clutched in one hand. Her eyes scanned the street, filled with a peace she had earned the hard way. And then, she saw her, a young woman in her 20s, holding a child in one arm, a plastic bag in the other. Her dupatta was slipping off her head, her eyes swollen from crying, shoulders slumped from shame. She stopped just in front of the gate, unsure if she belonged. Meher stepped forward gently. "Assalamu alaikum," she said softly. The woman looked up, startled. I heard you help women like me," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Meher smiled, the same serene, steady smile that once shook a man in a courtroom. Only now it radiated not just strength, but compassion. "You're exactly where you need to be," she said, opening the door wider. "Come in, we'll start again." The young woman broke down in tears. Meher placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and guided her inside. As the door closed behind them, the camera of life seemed to pause, freezing the moment in invisible ink. That wasn't a grand finale, it was a beginning, because Meher's victory wasn't just in walking away, it was in building something for those who couldn't yet stand. Her pain had been real, but her healing had become purpose, and as the foundation's halls filled with soft voices, brave steps, and rising hope, Meher knew she hadn't just survived a broken marriage. She had written a new story for herself, and for hundreds more, not with vengeance but with vision, and she had signed it, from beginning to end, with a smile.